Hello, I'm Michael Ano, the Director of Public Programs and Engagement at 18th Street Art Center, and I want to welcome you all to our conversation, The Practice of Disguise, Artist in Conversation with Ling-lin Ku, Ara Oshagan, and Cynthia Madansky. Though we are gathered here today in digital space, I want to acknowledge the origins of the physical space that we will talk about today, as well as the physical site of 18th Street Art Center. So I will start with the land acknowledgement. 18th Street Art Center recognizes and acknowledges the first people of the ancestral territory on which its two sites have been built. With respect to their elders, past and present, and future generations, we recognize the Gabrielino Tongva who are still here, and honor, with gratitude, the land itself, and those who have stewarded it through the generations. We honor and respect the many indigenous peoples still connected to this land on which we gather. We commit our work in service to and in alignment with these values. We are so very excited to host Ling-lin Ku's exhibition, The Practice of Disguise, now on view at 18th Street's Olympic campus. Seeing and not being seen, revealing and concealing, although at first appear to be binary opposites, are in fact forms of disguise. Using camouflage in the military as a starting point in the exhibition, The Practice of Disguise, Ku works at the intersection of digital camo and Guy Deleuze's concept of the body without organs. The exhibition features new work created at 18th Street, continuing Ku's exploration of the intersection of virtual and the intangible world, familiarity and the uncanny, otherness and selfness. Today's conversation is an extension of Ku's exhibition. She will be joined by LA-based photographer and installation artist Ara Oshagan, New York artist and LA-born filmmaker Cynthia Madansky. Lastly, I want to thank our generous supporters, the Taiwan Academy in Los Angeles and the Ministry of Culture, Taiwan, for their generous support. Thank you all, and we hope you enjoy the program.
So thank you for inviting us, Ling-lin, and it's really a pleasure to be in discussion with you on your work. And, you know, this is the second time I'm actually seeing a new body of work of yours, and we both want to congratulate you on the ISC Innovator Award. That's really bravo to you. That's very exciting. Congratulations. It's quite an honor.
Congratulations. Yeah,
it is an honor. I'm always excited when people can see my vision and interest in my practice in general. So yeah, that project is what I'm actually currently working on and showing at 18th Street. And that is the practice of disguise. It's also our topic that we're talking about today. And that is exploring, you know, the seemingly contract relationship between seeing and not seeing, revealing and disclose. So yeah, my approach is to take the inspiration from the natural world, the camouflage, and also through the lens of assisted eyes, which is the surveillance and digital computer screens, and through the socio-political aspect, like you know, the minority groups, marginalized people, you know, housing issue and unwanted land, etc. So yeah, this work is up now at 18th Street from November 15th to December 17th. And yeah, during the process, there are many interesting ideas come up, and I'm really excited. So.
Is this the second body of work that you've done on disguise, or is this a continuation? How do you see what you're exhibiting as a continuation or a new departure on the same topic?
Right. I have the idea for a really long time, and it started with like a more personal experience of, you know, as a foreigner living in a foreign country, that kind of experience of, you know, sometimes you stand up, sometimes you kind of disappear, that kind of very personal, deep experience. And then that kind of made me interested in, the relationship of seeing and not seeing, and turns to things or people around me that I only see, or I, not able to see it. So I just started to exploring that kind of visual, and also turns to more socio-political, digital perspective, things around me. So yeah, when we first met in New Mexico, that's like a starting point for me to have that ideas. And now I'm start to putting or looking for forms and how to put those ideas to like a visual language and, sculpture or different medias. So yeah, I think I always feel like it's a beginning, and I'm still continuing to exploring those these ideas and these like super broad topics. And also, I have my own vision and also my approaches, but I also really interested in see how other people, deal with similar ideas.
Is it possible? What happened? Is it possible to speak a little bit about, the sculptural, like sometimes your work is very installational, and like it's a big installation with sculpture, and it's almost like you're trying to create this environment of disguise, and sometimes it's very flat. And like the work that I've seen that you're doing recently is more of like relief work versus like you work on walls and it's almost like a relief, your sculpture, and sometimes it's very 3D and you want people to walk around it. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. My background is sculpture. I also work with a lot of different medias, and I work a lot with digital fabrication, which is naturally or inherently in between like digital and physical world. So that kind of affect the physical world affect the digital world, and digital world vice versa. So and also because the topic is so much about the vision, the scene, and of course in the contemporary world, it's so much about looking through the screens or assist the eyes, a camera, a lens. So there's a lot of things that naturally have to kind of flatten out in some way, just because that's how we see things. So I do a lot of things that's kind of intentionally flatten out on the wall or some kind of panel or screens. And that's something I thinking a lot about, like how those virtual worlds become more and more our actual world, and how we actually see things and represent and present like in our world. And as a sculptor, that I always interested in installation, just because that's something very hard to photograph, hard to participate that kind of flattened world, that everything you see online is, have to be a picture or a screen or video. But installation is something you have to be in person, experience the tactile and, that spatial relationship. So in a way that I feel it's a way I feel I preserve my my kind of creative zone, that you just have to be more intimate and then come to experience that part, and not just like take 1 second view on social media or on the website. So that is something I I think that's like a dilemma, but also a good challenge for everyone who makes like a 3D physical object. I think my best my favorite moment is when you go somewhere else, that we all take a million pictures of things we see now, but sometimes you have the moment that you just can't photograph well, or cannot be photographed. And I used to get a little bit frustrated by that, just like, oh man, I can't take that. But why I have to take a picture of that? It's just like, why can't I just look and use my eyes to look at this, and then trying to remember in my brain, and then somehow I became more appreciate that kind of moment that it's intimate, and also it's like belongs to me more than just like taking a picture. Because I feel when we take a picture that we are, in subconsciously we're taking some part with us, but that's actually not really. We just kind of forget like right away, and it become like a million pictures we took but never look again.
Yeah, I mean, it has to do with that experience, so, there's a saying where you either write or you live, right? And I extend that to you either take a photograph or you live. So when you're taking a photograph, you're mediating that experience, right? You're disrupting it. And I think what really successful sculptural work does, and I think this is what maybe part of what you're trying to do, is create an experience. And so when you go into a space, an immersive kind of space where it's tactile and sculptural, and you want people to engage with it. As soon as you take a photograph, then you've
Right, exactly.
off from that experience, right? So, I mean, if I did an installation, I would force people to leave their phones outside before they came into the space. So it's not mitigated by this kind of constant picture taking that we do these days.
That's very interesting. Yeah, in the work, I also kind of play that kind of logic that, in the digital world, we tend to see things. We want to see a lot close up, and also more and more crispy and high resolution images in that world. And then in a way that I feel the low resolution or the pixelation, it's a way to kind of disappear or hide yourself in the digital world. So in this body of work, I also kind of play with that idea that customize high resolution pixel squares, put pieces that to different images, and also embedded in small objects or my little secret message in the work, so that it, in a way, for me, it's like somehow it's like disguising. The viewer have to decode themselves and not just like look quickly through a clear image and get information right away. So that's like in the work.
Yeah, I think that when I look at what's interesting about the disguise of your work is that it's macro, so to speak. You're almost you're abstracting a concept or an item, and you're forcing people really to look at it and say, well, what is this referencing? So when we look at images, we're like, oh, our brain goes, oh, that's an apple. But you're taking the apple and you're taking a macro look, whether it's a pixel through a pixelation or through the holes in the apples or the details, and you're disguising it, and then also working with scale in a really interesting way. And part of your disguise is also not only the close-up, but the scale of the close-up, which is, closer and closer and closer, and then farther and farther and farther. So that also creates this tension of disguise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you reference this French philosopher Deleuze in your work, this idea of body without organs. Could you talk about that a little bit? I thought it was very interesting in how this idea of this kind of metaphysics of not metaphysics that kind of connects to actual sculptures that you're making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of goes back to the digital approaches, because that we in a more traditional sense that we experimenting material through our body, and experimenting these physical worlds through our physical bodies. But the body has like the virtual components, and also the agency. And I feel that comes more and more in the digital world, that the strain of conscious, the ideas, and also the virtual components become something else. It's no longer just virtual or opposite than the physical. It's become something, I don't know, haven't really defined that yet. And that's something I really want to explore in the work, especially I think that's an interesting thing to explore in between the physical and the virtual world. That kind of the body without organ, and what is the body, and how do we navigate and also perceive and form our view of the world. And I find that because the digital world is never just like virtual, it's like algorithm behind this. There's like a structure that we don't see that behind this, and then we form each individual world that we think that's the whole world, but it's actually catering to the individuals. And then I find that's very fascinating, and also really difficult to really connect with people, because we think we share the world in the same way, but actually we each have a very different world that kind of collide to our physical world and also the reality. So I find that something interesting, and I do that a lot in the work, different attempts in the work, like froze the glitch in, you know, the physical object or images, because that, to me, that's like in between like the physical and the virtual world, that the sudden unexplainable errors, it's kind of like evidence to show that, oh, this is maybe not real, and the reality could be somewhere else. And so I explore like those glitch a lot and also play with the scale in on the work, that kind of what Cynthia talked about, like the zoom in and zoom out, like reflect on the scale of the objects I was making.
It's interesting. I think about film a lot, and you know, there used to be like this subversive advertising happening. Like they would have they would do a commercial, and then there would be like this image that would be inserted that was psychologically affecting, us to buy a product. And in a way, the glitches also are like these phantom subversive, they could turn to be these phantom subversive items within the digital age. Like they could be transformed into something very, subversive, I would say. Not necessarily propaganda the way they used it in advertising, but in a much more radical way.
I think we're talking about like the digital world a lot, about like seeing, not seeing through the kind of a different way of just eyeball the objects. And I think that's like something very interesting, and also a different sense than the visual, which I just experienced last week when I drove to San Diego. It's like a very scenery drive, and I enjoy the view. But all of a sudden, I just smell something really intense, like really gross. And also, living in Houston, also in Taiwan, like I know this with a sweet smell that it's just like this oil refinery, but you don't see it. And and I look up like why, my impression of California is like much greener. It's a green energy, technology based, and it's like people are very conscious about this. So where does the smell come from? And then I just look up that and found like there's actually a lot of oil refinery in LA, in California, but they are disguised in like a different way that you just don't see that's an oil refinery. They will look like church bell tower or buildings, or the entire island is actually artificial. It's like oil refinery. So it's like this is unsettling, but also a little bit fascinating as an artist to just see that kind of disguise. And I know, Cynthia, you're working with a project that deal with like unseen force pollution, and also that kind of power. Like, do you want to talk about your project?
Sure. I would say that my film is called Index Trace, at It's looking at the entire nuclear trajectory according to the indices of uranium mining, because everything nuclear starts with uranium, and uranium mining, to weapon production, which is a very big field, from the laboratories that produce it at the universities, to the national laboratories, to the uranium enrichment sites, to the plutonium production sites, to the missile sites, to the submarine sites, to the, the Air Force sites. And then you have nuclear power, which is supposedly the civilian use of nuclear, which is also very problematic. And then you have waste, and every single part of the nuclear trajectory produces high-level waste. And the whole project, unless you're from an impacted community, it's been disguised from the beginning. It's been like this, the nuclear agenda has been enforced by a secret state within the democratic, state country. So no one in the 50s was allowed to talk about what they were working on. Entire communities and workers didn't even know what they were working on when they went to the plants. So the whole basis and premise was about disguise and secrecy. And I think what I'm finding more and more is that even today, there's so much hush hush and secrecy and, fear of selling the nuclear, important information, just like these two people who just got arrested about selling material about nuclear submarines, to not telling workers, is this safe, or, how can I protect myself better? So secrecy or disguise by the government, I would say disguise, but it's really about secrecy. Like now the cat is out of the bag. Everybody knows that this is nuclear and this is, dangerous, but still how dangerous it is, how to protect oneself is still secretive and disguised as, oh, everything's normal. So the disguise is in the normalcy, I would say. The disguise is in the propaganda of saying, this is all, everything's fine, everything's safe. You don't have to be scared by anything. We're producing great nuclear power and great nuclear energy, and this is clean and green. But it's a lie, first of all, because all the process of producing nuclear energy produces high-level radioactive waste, which is incredibly dangerous. But also it's disguising the truth, I would say. So the nuclear corporate military complex is based on secrecy and disguise.
In fact, on that road that you drove down to San Diego, Ling-lin, right? There is a nuclear power plant, right there, right on the ocean. There's a, and it looks completely normal. You think, oh, maybe it's not a big deal, but it is very dangerous, right, Cynthia, to have that right there near population centers. Jeez,
absolutely, absolutely. So it's this normalcy of, even if it's in your face, it's still disguised. It's a disguise for what is really going on, which is actually criminal. It's
like a foggy gray zone between like lying and not telling the truth, right? Like in a way that it could be. I always think disguise can be practical, active, creative, but that's something I think most of the time the disguise was more for a dark purpose, like this, like there's like evil behind that, and like a lot of other things that a lot of powerful things is like invisible. But if you're marginalized group people, that's probably not invisible. It's real. You get sick and you affect the community you live. So that's something not invisible at all.
Yeah, I think disguise and lying and transparency and truth, and I think that if we look at on lies, secrets, and silence, you can all formulate that all into methods of disguising truth. So whether it's lies, secrets, silence, it's all methodologies of disguising the truth, hiding the truth.
Cynthia, how do you turn your eyes to these topics? Like it's hard to see, but also very big to see.
I think I came of age during the 70s when there were a lot of building of nuclear power plants in this country, and I lived close to one. But I think I came to, understand the dangers of nuclear power at a moment in history where there was a lot more consciousness and public awareness about the dangers of nuclear power. Whereas, so it was just kind of it was a natural progression to keep learning about nuclear issues because it was in the forefront of the public imagination in America at that time in the 70s. Today, it's not. So I think it's much harder climate change, which is such a big topic, but fossil fuels is in the forefront of the public imagination. So and over the last 75 years, the nuclear industry has camouflaged the nuclear, what's going on in this country so successfully that people don't even know that the nuclear power plants exist or what exists in this country as part of the nuclear architecture. So again, this disguise is an ongoing structural device, I think, that this country has invested trillions of dollars into. So I think I keep learning about it. I don't think it's just like one day I woke up about and said, oh, I'm going to do this. I keep learning about this topic and I keep meeting more and more people who are impacted by this. Just like having a conversation. Oh, my father worked in China Lake in California and he died of, cancer. Oh, somebody worked here in Idaho and they died of cancer. Oh, downwinders. So the more you speak about it, the more you see that there is a lot of truth that comes out, but it's been so repressed because the government wants to keep a lid on it. So I keep, learning. I don't know if I came upon it because I wanted to come upon it, but I think it's a really big political issue that we have to address, especially now with climate change. And that it really needs to be inserted into the climate change agenda, mainly because I believe in disarmament and nuclear abolition, but also the brain drain because of the investment, trillions of dollars into the nuclear industry, whether it's decommissioning them and bailing out the corporations for the nuclear power plants, or even the universities who are saying, here, get a job. You go to MIT, get a job in the nuclear industry. We need those young people who are smart to get a job in the green industry and finding new ways. But the money is going into, still after 75 years, is going into the nuclear industry. So that is, I'm hoping that this film will create a relevant past, present, future context to what the mapping and what the history and what the present day and what the future considerations we have to look at in terms of nuclearism, because it's not going away. You can't just sweep it under the rug and say, okay, you can shut down oil refineries, but even if you shut down a nuclear power plant, then you've got like massive radioactive waste that is, the lifespan is, beyond our comprehension. It is the virtual. It is beyond our human comprehension, the lifespan of plutonium or uranium. And we have to find innovative ways to guard it for future generations. Otherwise, they're going to be walking through fields that have been contaminated by the industry and not know that, oh, I'm walking on a field with uranium, and get sick and pass it on genetically. So it's a really big topic, but I'm in it.
Yeah,
And I think maybe some people, realize some of the cancer that they may get from being exposed to radioactivity. But for instance, the environmental damage that nuclear testing has done in this country is completely unknown. And like huge parts of Nevada, for instance, are completely pockmarked by nuclear testing over the decades. And you said, right, up until the early 90s, there was underground nuclear testing in this country. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is why, in a way, it's like, it's saying, okay, your propaganda of disguise is really great, but you know what? Activists across the country have been challenging you for 75 years, and this film is going to honor these activists and this movement who has been really committed to protecting the air, water, land, and people in ways that are so brilliant, you know, and absolutely have to be at on the table in the discussions about climate change. Like, we do not need to invest in building more bombs. We need to shut the nuclear power plants down. We need to find a solution to remediate land. It's not cleanup. It's some kind of protection of the land. We have to change the semiotics of the nuclear industry and how they frame it, because it's all disguise and secrecy.
Yeah, Cynthia, I watched the trailer, the video you sent us, and you travel extensively. That there's covers so many places. I was so surprised. It's like, you know, like there's so many places have those nuclear power plant, and I was like, super admire you, like, you know, your determination and energy to like really address these issues, and also.
Yeah, and it's not plants, it's like, it is really uranium mines. There are over, you know, 1,200 abandoned uranium mines. There are, you know, there are many in states, there are power plants, there are waste sites, there are weapon production sites, there are uranium enrichment sites. I mean, the whole country is nuclear, basically, and no one, even the wealthy people who live in LA, can't get away from it. San Obispo happens, there's an accident, when there are communities in like San Obispo who are monitoring what's going on there. And if they weren't monitoring it, then it would be in worse shape. And now it's for the next generation to take over, because people my age and older are saying, okay, environmentalists really start looking at this issue in relation to the climate change issue. It's really related, and it should not be separated, and it should have been discussed at the, you know, whatever summits are happening in the world. Like, nuclear is part of the discussion of, should be essential part of the discussion of climate change. It is not a solution. It is not green. It is not clean. It produces radioactive waste. This is a problem.
Exactly. Yeah, that made, from your video, let me think a lot about the relationship of people and also the land. That, you know, a lot of time we think that our relationship to the land is very absolute, and also like, you know, rooted in somewhere, but also we don't know, or the relationship is actually more dynamic than we think. You know, through the different approaches, like the climate change that we're all facing right now, or, you know, through community, or, you know, there's a lot of different aspects of determine our relationship to the land. And Ara, I know you work a lot about, you know, with those, you know, people or in different territory, and, you know, the place you want to, you know, responding to that part of your project.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that you brought up land, because that was kind of what I was thinking about. What is that relation to land? And, you know, over generations, that relationship can completely change. Right. So a lot of my work is a question about what is that relationship to land, because when you're living in diaspora, so all my work, all my community and me, and for several generations now, 4 generations now, we've been diasporic. We've been off our indigenous lands because of I'm of Armenian heritage, so Armenian genocide happened 100 years ago, and so we've been living in diaspora for 4 years. So these issues of land, and it's, you know, similar to issues that Native Americans have here in the United States, they're longer term, but the issues are very much parallel. So when you are pushed off your land, you know, what is that relationship? I always say, you replace that relationship with the land with something else, you know, perhaps, you know, an artist, so I really replace it with art, or with literature, or with photography or something. So that becomes the kind of the home that you create, right? So the space in which you can be, you can feel connected and you can belong. If you don't have that land, so you have to create this other spaces where you can belong and you can connect.
Ara, I was curious how you see yourself, or maybe with your family in the US. Like when you start here, how do you feel about? Do you feel connected, or like what's the relationship?
It's a very complicated relationship, multi-layered and complicated with multiple histories that involved, right? So I kind of feel my identity or my relationship to the United States is so multiplex. It's a hybrid. So I grew up in an Armenian, in Beirut, Lebanon. So there was Lebanese, Armenian, and I had kind of a French education. So I grew up with these three cultures. And then we were displaced by the war, came to the United States. And so I knew a little bit of English, but I learned English. But it's not only the language, right? It's the kind of this way of life, this culture that seeps into you and becomes part of you, becomes part of who you are. And then you have all these hybrid identities that are within you, inside you. They're all you, and somehow none of them are you completely, right? And so kind of your identity is perhaps defined or it's realized when you shift from one to the other. For instance, you may relate to this. When I speak Armenian, for instance, it's not only the language, it's a whole culture, way of life, way of thinking that comes along with that. When I switch to English, for instance, it's a whole other set of this cultural kind of presence that comes with it. Then at that point, I'm in that kind of space, and perhaps the identity is this shifting between all these different kinds of ways of life and things. So I think about that a lot. I consider that, I obsess over that a lot, I could say, and a lot of my work is about that, trying to find an articulation of this kind of diasporic existence. There's a very well-known Armenian author who we're collaborating on this next book that's coming out, who says, it's difficult to translate, but he says, to find the locus where to be. To be works, and it's difficult in English, but to be. So the idea is to try to find that space where you can be, where you can belong, where you can connect. And the big question is, if you are indigenous and you are on your land, that's a whole different set of other issues that connect you. And then if you're not, then you have to address these things, right? Try to find that space.
Yeah, totally. I feel, as an immigrant to the States, that this is definitely, I see a lot of myself, what you talk about, that it's, in a way, it's easier for me to disconnect with the culture or the world here, that English is not my first language. So if I don't want to hear, it's easier for me to become some kind of noise here, but also it's a barrier for me to really directly connect to people here too. So, and also everywhere feels more like a temporary place that I don't see myself put the roots in anywhere, and it still feel like, in a way, it's a freedom, but also, it feels like a dandelion, you're just flying around the air. Yeah. Looking for places.
Sorry, I want to definitely, it may seem negative in terms of you don't have a space, but I think it's also very positive in that sense, and that ambiguity, in that ambiguity between languages, cultures, ways of life, you have this tremendous freedom to I think, create. There is that space where things happen, connections are made that would not otherwise happen. So I think it's kind of this dichotomy or this contradiction that you're searching and you're struggling, trying to find articulation, but also there's that freedom, that ambiguity that creates freedom for you to articulate.
I think also there's, I was born in the US, so I have a very different experience here. But I think that because I've lived in many different places, you have this insider outsider perspective that really contributes to, you know, understanding or misunderstanding or articulation or misarticulation of, and it's a very complicated position to be in, actually, especially if, you know, as a let's say an American going to other countries. You don't also want to be in this position of the, you know, the American going there. So it's also, it's a, you know, how are you seen, and how do you see, and how are you perceived, and class and race and, you know, gender. I mean, so many issues come into play when you become, you know, I think the immigrant issue is a very different, because it's like, that means you're supposed to, this is your new home. And what does that mean, that this is your new home? And what does home mean?
Yeah, I mean,
So I think what, you know, it's like, what does this home mean? And can you ever really be at home here in this country, you know? So
yeah. And yeah, and I don't think immigration is really should be thought of in one direction. So that's how that's traditionally thought of. People come to one direction, you flee someplace, you come here. But I think it's really reciprocal. You know, I think there's a lot of things that happen, go backwards. You may physically, people may not go back to the country they came from, but there's family, there's connectivity, there's a lot of resources that go back. And so, you know, I think we should try to get out of this mentality where immigration is one directional, and it's kind of multi-directional. It's that, you know, diaspora is the kind of the word that kind of I think should be replacing that idea of it. So it goes in all directions and all the time. It could go up, down, it could go vertical, it could go horizontal. It's kind of, I think of it as kind of like a neural network of connectivity across the globe, especially for like Armenian, sort of the transnation that we are, where we have a presence all over the world. So there's kind of this neural network of connectivity, and it's kind of non-hierarchical in that sense, that that my identity is not hierarchical, that in that sense that I may, like my Armenian identity is not classified in any shape or form to be horizontal, but it's all not to be vertical, but to be horizontal. They're kind of equally present in the person and in the community. But that's this idea that Cynthia, that to go someplace and to, how do you present yourself, right? And I think Ling-lin, you spoke about that in the beginning. If you're an American, you go to another country, you're clearly, from the way you dress and the way you walk, you recognize as to be an outsider, but you could also definitely be an insider. For instance, that happens to me a lot as when I go back, for instance, to Armenia. So I was born in diaspora, brought up in the ways of the diaspora, but Armenia is a complete different land, different culture. As you know, Cynthia, well, the Soviet culture is very different than anything West. And so I will be kind of in a disguise, in a sense, without really realizing, just being myself, walking in the street. I would be completely noticed to be a foreigner from the outside. But then, for instance, because I know the language, as soon as I start speaking with somebody, and, you know, Armenian, you know, people are really standoffish, right? They're like, who is this? You know, they'll be like looking at you in this way, right? Who is this guy? Who is this person walking in our streets? And then as soon as I speak Armenian, it just like melts, it just melts away. And then that disguise completely kind of vanishes in that moment of recognition that, oh, you speak our language, you must be somehow connected to us.
I feel the same way every time I go back to Taiwan.
Yeah.
Here, but every time I go back home, I would just realize how like immersed I am in the whole crowd, that it's just like, I'm just like a part of just like air, you know, or water, that you just feel so natural. You don't even think about that. And just because you speak the same language and everything, just like in a weird, familiar way that people understand each other. It just, you know, it's a little bit different than here. You know, not any issues living here, but it's like different. You notice that when you're back your home. And yeah, also like something I feel interesting about like, you know, the just following the idea of immigrant or the idea of just like, you know, people living somewhere else, not even defined as an immigrant. Because I know, Cynthia, you also like travel a tons of places. You've been like so many places and cultures that we all know, like, you know, being in a different place, being immersed in different place, always being stand out that idea. And also, I feel like, you know, the coming from a place, a little island that you always have to disguise as a, you know, a different name. You can never call yourself, you know, from Taiwan, you say Chinese Taipei or something. That's just something really kind of cause some like confusion when I grow up. Like as a kid, they're just like, what is this? Why I learned a land I'm not living in, and also why I use a different name when like everybody knows this is not. So it's like a very weird feeling, and also I think that probably subconsciously affect my identity of like who we are, who I am, and where I'm from. You know, the idea of, you know, and now it's even more complicated because I live in a different culture, and then I guess I just kind of have to go with the flow and, you know, not even try to define it. I guess I can, you know, it's not up to me as an individual or as my generation. It maybe takes so much longer to like figure out, you know. So
I don't know. We haven't figured out much yet. We've been around a while. Right?
you know, are your views on those like issues or like the topics of the Romanian genocide since the last century, and also since then there's like a, you know, it's never get resolved, and also I guess that's why you're interesting, you know, the idea of the border between South and North Korea, that kind of invisible line and divided in the culture, two cultures, and also, you know, I think I always admire your effort to deal with those deep issues back in the time that's not solved, and that's why the complicated issues continue and we just can't solve. But and then you always turn to the source and the deep, complicated issues that people trying to forget or people don't want to talk about anymore, but it is there and it affects us continuously. And how can we not look at that or see that? So, and also not just Armenia. I know you're like working with the project with different cultures, in Korea and those war. Basically the woman
For women, yeah. So yeah. I mean, what's really interesting in Korea is that, as you know, it's the only country that's divided by a border. It's like within it's just like a country that's not a country because it's completely divided. And you can see that on the map, right? But then what's really was really interesting for me was when you go to the border, and I had the fortunately I could go to the border, where that contradiction in that it's one country but it's two, kind of you see it on the border in different ways, because there's the DMZ, and I didn't actually go on the land part of the DMZ, but on the water side, on the western side, whereas there's an estuary where a number of rivers come together. And so there's these huge fences. It's one of the most militarized areas of the world, because there are these double huge fences with barbed wire and then military guards all along. And if you peek around, you can see them standing, you know, they're kind of ready. But then at the same time, it's this tremendous kind of estuary of wildlife and birds cawking and the water swooshing. And so this kind of beautiful kind of natural reserve place that's been untouched, right? Because DMZ has been untouched for 50 odd years now. But at the same time, it's fortified with military armaments and war. So this contradiction is like, it's like you see it right there and you feel it right there. And it was really one of the most intense experiences for me to be in that space, actually. And it's connected to a kind of a disguise, you know, since that's the kind of topic we're talking about. you don't look very closely, you could think that there is no military presence there. Because there are some places where the fences, the brush has overgrown the fences, so they're kind of covered up. So you may think it's just, oh, it just maybe whatever fence, but this is kind of a military presence. So it's kind of a disguise there also.
I was thinking about like seeing like, you know, a lot of things we don't see until maybe the media or, you know, somebody present to you. And Cynthia, I know that, I mean, once you said like it's a political act to see or to be seen, and I really like that. Could you like also talk a little bit about?
Well, I was speaking to a friend recently she was kind of giving me a teach-in about movement building, and that there are two kinds of movement building. And this was based on a book by Alicia Garcia, who was part of the founder of Black Lives Matter, and that there's like populist movement and then there's a united front. And the populist is like you have a smaller agenda, and the united is like you might have different agendas, but you kind of work together towards something bigger. And that it is an act, it is a political act to see, because if you want to just stay in your bubble, or if you don't want to learn about, say, about nuclear, then you don't want to learn about nuclear. So you're already taking the step to see. Then the next step is knowledge is also power. But then really the question is, what do you do with that knowledge? And that is I think that's the movement building. So we can all, hopefully at this end of this film, see what's going on, and we might have more knowledge. But then really the question, and I guess this is about art and film in general, like, is it just going to be another film that we learn something and then we go back to our lovely homes? Or are we going to, and I don't really know if this is possible for films to do this, but is it going to activate something that could help the movement? Like, I guess the political act for filmmaking in some ways is, yes, to see, yes, a knowledge base, but then I guess really political act would be that it could motivate the movement. So it is a political act to see, and it's a really important moment because we're all in such denial about so many issues. And those with more privilege are perhaps in more denial because they're more protected. Those are from impacted communities, whether it's political, asylum, or environmental. Of course, they're always seeing, and they have the political analysis, without needing to see any film. So this film is really only an honoring of their work, but they don't need to see this film because they know what's going on already. So it's really about showing the people who don't want to see, to get the accountable knowledge from the people who are the experiential thought leaders in this country. And then hopefully it will motivate people to, reignite this movement so that we could stop the corporations and the governments from investing trillions of dollars in building bombs and nuclear power plants, and instead in healthcare and education and environmental issues and peace and justice. Economic, social, environmental peace and justice. I mean, that would be my hope, but it is an act. It's a political act, but it's so not enough at this point in history. I could say, yeah, I see a lot of, I read a lot, I see a lot, but am I really, how am I really, it's not about just going to the demonstrations, but how am I supporting that the movement will be built so that we can change the system and that we can have impact on governments and that we can have, we can live in a world that, clearly has to address that this genocide, the Armenian genocide took place, and what are we doing with reparations? I mean, it's just like, these are crimes against humanity. And I feel like, so we can see the crimes against humanity, but how do we go to the next step?
Man,
That's our fundamental challenge as artists who work in social justice issues, you're right. I think that you put it very succinctly, Cynthia. Like, so you can maybe get somebody to see, maybe get them to perhaps change their attitude, learn something, right? But what do we do? That next step is so difficult. There's such a huge gulf in really making a shift in somebody's life to make a difference. That's I think the fundamental challenge we face.
And I don't see myself as I mean, I definitely make political art, but I've never until this moment of this film actually went beyond the seeing and the knowledge. Now I'm like, okay, this has to do something more. This is maybe the first piece that I'm making that maybe it's really a false messiah that I'm thinking that even this could happen with this film, but I hope that something else happens with this film beyond seeing and knowledge.
Because you're working with other groups to
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody, I'm working with activists across the country. I mean, they're the people who know the information. I'm kind of just translating and finding ways to form. It's like I'm almost being a choreographer or a sculptor, or, I'm finding form for that is palpable for people to understand and activate. So yeah, but absolutely, I'm trying to create a film that's a horizontally made film, because I can't speak about what's going on in South Dakota. Only the activists in South Dakota know what's going on there. So it has to be a collaborative, their message. It has to be their message, and then I help translate it in some way. And the research is massive, because some states have 6 places, some sites have 11 places. So you're talking to activists from 11 different sites sometimes, and what's happened in your community and how has it impacted your community. And if you had 1 minute to say, if you had one line to say one thing about your site, what would it be for the next generation? I mean, that's the kind of conversation I'm having, because obviously I can't go into depth in every single site. It's not, it could be a 12-hour film, but I think it'll be a 2-hour film. I don't mind making a 12-hour film.
I think we should just also like continuing to exploring like different forms and those topics, because it's like ongoing thing. Like artist practice is always like a journey, and I definitely feel this project, I mean, I've been thinking this for so long, but this is kind of the first attempt to, put the forms and ideas together, and, new things coming up. And I'm really excited. And also, this is super great to have the conversation with you too, and see, your creative approaches to this related topics. That it's super interesting to know, like, how you deal with, unseen force, pollution, and, and those land and the language, and that relationship to people and over time, and not just like a status. It's like ongoing things. That's like super helpful, and also super informative and inspiring to like hearing like each other's practice. And this is really great. Then yeah, we should continue this conversation and also see each other's work.
I would love that.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
that would be great. Thank you so much for inviting us to be in conversation with each other. It's been really great to meet you, Ara. And
yes, pleasure to meet you, Cynthia and Ling-lin. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation.
Thank you very much. This is so inspiring.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for all the fantastic panelists and their provocative questions and complicating discussions. Thanks to Ling-lin, Ara, Cynthia, and this coming together of ideas. You can find out more about each of the panelists at 18thstreet.org. And just a quick plug that you can become a member of 18th Street as part of our Borderless program. So if you liked what you saw today, just know you can help support us and create content that is free and open to the public. Plus, you'll get exclusive content that is just for our members, focusing on artist communities around the world. Just visit 18thstreet.org/borderless for more information, or click on the link below. Thank you so much and hope you have a wonderful afternoon.